I'm Edward October, and this is A Nefarious Nightmare. This podcast contains foul language and discussions of violence. Additional trigger warnings will be posted as needed in the show notes. Listener discretion is advised.
Jason Landry was on his way home to see his family for Christmas when his car crashed on Salt Flat Road in Luling, Texas, in the early morning of Monday, December 14th, 2020.
He was on his way home from Texas State University to spend the holidays with his family, but instead had seemingly disappeared into thin air. It's coming up on 2 years since he's been missing, and the family is desperate for answers. With that, I'm Courtney Fenner.
And I'm Amanda Cronin, and A Nefarious Nightmare presents Salt Flat Road. Where is Jason Landry?
This case is so bizarre to me because it gives me some pretty minor Dyatlov vibes. You'll certainly hear why as we dig into this case, but long story short, a man from San Marcos went missing, and that was in December of 2020. The search is still ongoing. We want to help however we know how because the family's still seeking answers to unanswered questions. This case is currently unsolved and somewhat ongoing. It's unclear as to whether this is officially considered a cold case, but the search indeed continues.
Jason Landry was born July 29th, 1999. His father, Kit Landry, remembers Jason as always being strong-willed, courageous, and optimistic. Jason had an affinity for music and loved playing instruments of any kind. This was so much of a passion that he went on to attend Texas State and study music. Jason even had moved to San Marcos just a few months before and leased an apartment close by to his school. His father said it was an odd time because the university, like much of the country and the world, was under coronavirus restrictions. But Jason was enjoying being there, his father said.
Upon completing his first semester at Texas State, his childhood friend and also college neighbor, Jack Frank, said that Jason planned to go home for Christmas. It was when Jason was coming back home for Christmas when this entire mystery started. Jack even remembers seeing Jason every single day leading up to this disappearance. He mentioned that he noticed that Jason relied pretty heavily on smoking weed. It was 2020 at the time, and he was doing online school at Texas State Sam Houston. He continues by saying that he thought the online life and quarantine wasn't good for Jason as he was an extrovert. He also noticed that Jason hasn't been eating or sleeping properly.
The night of December 13th, 2020, it was in the low 40s, which is very cold for Texas. The real field temperature was around 30 degrees. The area his car was found is a low populated area where a lot of oil workers are. There are a few buildings and structures nearby, some vacant and others abandoned. At around 10:55 p.m., he left his San Marcos apartment for his parents' home in Missouri City, where he is expected to spend his winter break. Because Jason has driven home only twice before December, he opened his Waze app, which is a GPS app that is arguably better than Google Maps, to guide him.
Around 11:05 p.m., according to Caldwell County Sheriff investigators, Landry is driving his tan Nissan Altima on Texas 80 and passes under Interstate 35 in San Marcos. He then continues south on Texas 80 into Caldwell County and is in Martindale just before 11:15 p.m. He then continues on Texas 80, passes Texas 130, and goes through several small towns. Around 11:24 p.m., about a half hour into his drive, he enters Luling on Texas 80. As he moves through the intersection with Hackberry Street, where Texas 80 becomes Austin Street, he quits using Waze, which is a really awesome GPS app, and begins using the Snapchat app, according to police. He then continues on Austin Street to Magnolia Avenue, where his digital footprint ends.
Authorities believe that instead of turning right on Magnolia, he drives straight through the intersection on East Austin Street to Spruce Street, which turns into Salt Flat Road. He is believed to have crashed around 11:34 p.m. according to authorities. Around 12:31 a.m. on December 14th, his Altima is seen crashed and abandoned with the lights still on and the keys still in the ignition. The front passenger side door was locked. A volunteer firefighter was driving down Salt Flat Road, which is a county road in Luling. He encounters a vehicle against a fence line. Headlights are on, windows kicked out, but nobody's in the car. The officer searched the area for the owner of the car, but couldn't find anyone close by. His car was off the east side of the road. There was no blood inside of his car, and it is unknown if Jason was wearing his seatbelt during the crash. But the airbags did not deploy. But just because there's no blood doesn't mean that there was not an injury. We cannot discount the fact that he got seriously injured during the crash. The car was not drivable due to one of the wheels being damaged and stuck in the fence.
So, Salt Flat Road is mostly a gravel road that turns into pavement the closer you get to Luling, but it was gravel where his car was found and not in good shape. Most of the road is bordered by barbed wire fences, and there are a number of creeks, streams, ponds, and reservoirs in the area. Coyotes and wild boars are heavily present in the region as well. It's just a popular hunting spot in the fall time.
Texas Department of Public Safety troopers respond about an hour after Jason's car is discovered. Investigators think it crashed into a tree and a barbed wire fence after Landry overcorrected on the gravel road and spun out of control. The rear window of the vehicle was the one smashed out as a result of the impact with the tree. Caldwell County authorities have said no evidence indicates that another vehicle or outside force was involved in the crash. Officers found clothes down the road from the site of the crash. They are strewn about the road in an order like somebody was stripping them off as they ran. They also found a backpack containing a wallet and marijuana. The trooper calls in the license plate around 2 a.m. They connect with him and Jason's parents since they are the registered owners of the crashed car they found. Jason's parents did ask the officer if he had found Jason's phone, and the officer had told them no.
Kent recalls that the officer was pretty nonchalant about it. When he eventually enters the car, he goes through the unlocked driver's side door. He then finds Jason's phone between the driver's seat and the center console. Authorities have said that they don't know if the phone fell while Landry was driving through the intersection of Austin Street and Magnolia Avenue or during the crash. So Kent takes the phone, he leaves to go look for Jason himself, and then he arrives at the scene of the accident, notices the tire marks, and then he turns around and notices all of Jason's clothes strewn down the road, notices the socks, and he just knows. I mean, they call it parents' intuition, but he knows they're Jason's.
Around 6 a.m. and about 100 feet away, they found clothes thought to be what Jason was wearing before the crash. A shirt, shorts, socks, underwear, and slides. Also a wristwatch, according to authorities. Investigators found a single blood smear on the left side hip of the area of his shorts, but do not believe it is an indication of any serious injuries. The blood spot could be coming into contact with the barbed wire fence or the car after the crash. Authorities believe no other blood is found at the crash scene or inside the vehicle. A ball cap and a plastic bag of personal effects and a tumbler with a dead betta fish are also found near the crash scene.
And it's kind of crazy because the cops didn't take any of it or bag it up. The scene wasn't worked. Instead of taking it serious, they were indeed nonchalant. Kent was the one who videoed everything. He took pictures before moving or picking anything up. I mean, he was careful. Jason was not searched for because the police claimed that they figured it was an impaired driver who ran because he was driving under the influence. But Jason left his phone and his jacket in the car, his backpack with all of his money and credit cards on the side of the road, and his clothing, including his watch, were on the road about 100 feet south of the car. To all of us, all of you listening, this seems like more than just an impaired or inebriated driver who ran off. Why is this not obvious to the police? So no first responders enter the vehicle, which is towed to an impound yard.
His phone location and his phone was in the tow lot where the detectives had towed his car to. Kent went there and found it in between the seat and the console. Understandably, Kent got frustrated and called the police, wondering what's going on with his missing son. Texas Highway Patrol then finally gets a rescue team together. Texar, which is a non-profit that comes into smaller communities to help search.
So Texar started first at the site of the crash, right near where the car was wrecked. There was a hillside, and on the other side of the hill is this pond. All the search dogs kept going straight to the pond, which is pretty bizarre because they then brought in dive teams, sonar teams, and then drained the whole pond. They didn't find him there, which is frustrating because what did the search dogs know that we don't? Anyway, the family is no doubt thankful that he wasn't in the pond, but however, where is he? Because there have been hundreds of thousands of drone images taken and picked with a fine-tooth comb, and tons of dogs searched. They started to search the car for forensics, pulled game cameras, resident cameras, even convenience store cameras. Nothing came up. Texar did stop all search operations due to the police telling them to, since it wasn't going anywhere.
Waze kept his geolocation data, and they searched his history to see where he was going and doing on his phone leading up to the disappearance. Luz Moreno-Lorano is a reporter for the Austin American Statesman. She goes on to say, quote, "When you are using apps like Waze, they ping you every time you pass a tower. And so they can see minute by minute where you are. And the thing about using technology is that you can see where you close it out. And I think that's really been a game changer for investigators," end quote. And she makes a valid point because according to his phone history, he minimizes Waze and goes into Snapchat. He looked at a story and missed his turn. Instead of going right, he goes straight.
Caldwell County Sheriff's Office examined Jason Landry's search history and communications leading up to his disappearance, finding Google searches for how long can you live in the woods without food or how long can you go into the wilderness. They also said that he's looking up some spiritual enlightenment practices, different strains of marijuana, and how to combine those. He's also been known to talk about psychedelics and how they've impacted his life and spiritual awakening, as well as his intent of reaching spiritual enlightenment via narcotics. Caldwell County Sheriff's Office Captain Jeff Ferry thinks that this plays a vital role in his disappearance.
One thing to mention here is that Jason FaceTimed his friend in Missouri City approximately 1 hour before leaving his San Marcos apartment. Ferry said Landry's friend screen recorded the conversation because, quote, "Jason was so messed up that he didn't think he was going to remember it later," end quote. Jason was set to meet the friend he was FaceTiming in Missouri City. Ferry called the video a quote-unquote wealth of information. Explaining it allowed investigators to determine what Landry was wearing when he left his San Marcos apartment, matched that clothing to the clothing found in the roadway near the crash site, and, quote, say it with certainty that he's by himself in the car, end quote.
Ferry then said, quote, "All signs point to us that he was under the influence, and we know that he's going to get in the car and try to navigate his way to Missouri City, where his parents are not expecting him. He was not due home. He was going to hang out with his buddies, play video games, and get high," end quote. The recording had no sound. The sheriff's office attempted to have university-level experts lip-read the conversation, but efforts were unsuccessful, meaning the sheriff's office had to rely on Landry's friend for the record. Quote, "They're talking about spiritual awakening and enlightenment and opening his third eye and drug consumption," end quote, said Ferry. The video shows Landry rolling several blunts and placing them inside a CVS container. Landry's seen sweating profusely as his armpits are saturated. The blunts were discovered approximately 3 hours later by a state trooper inside Landry's backpack near the crash site. Ferry goes on to say, quote, "Certainly seems relevant knowing that in less than an hour, Jason's going to be disrobing in a very cold, austere environment."
The area where his wrecked car was found abandoned is known to be rife with wild hogs. We do have to mention the slight possibility that if Jason was somewhere in the woods unconscious, hogs could have eaten him. It's not something that is pleasant to bring up, but it's definitely a possibility. Later that day, Landry is officially declared missing, and a Texas-based nonprofit group, Texas Search and Rescue, comes on as the lead search team. Texas EcuSearch, a search group on horseback, also assisted. Abel Pena is a retired FBI officer and now helps with missing people. His daughter is at Texas State and good friends with Jason Landry, so she called him to help, with which he obliged. He then called the family offering his help free of charge. His nonprofit is called Project Absentees and includes retired FBI agents, Border Patrol, etc.
Abel thinks that Jason was a normal college kid, nothing crazy with the marijuana in his opinion, and it's also mentioned that Landry had traveled the route correctly twice before. He found it very odd that the clothes were found going down the road. It's also mentioned that they destroyed evidence by not handling the scene correctly, so they interviewed everyone who lived on that road and didn't get very much from anyone except that there's a drug problem in the area of Luling. Some saying, quote, bad people with an uptick in violent crimes, end quote. People were reluctant to speak to the police. They would say that they knew things but were afraid to talk because of local drug dealers in the area. They then set up a tip line. Lots of phone calls with tips and leads flooded in, but unfortunately, nothing came through after following them.
Abel then mentions Magnolia in Austin Street and how he came across people there, and they said that something happened. They said that he might not have been driving the vehicle and it crashed purposefully and then threw his clothes around to make it seem like something happened there. Then from anonymous callers, they said Jason was accosted by individuals at that same location, the Magnolia and Austin Street. They also said that if these guys were arrested, they're worried about the repercussions and their families.
We always try to avoid theorizing and, giving an opinion, but with any kind of cold case or mystery or something like that, whenever a case is unsolved, it's kind of hard not to. So with that being said, a lot of people think that following the accident, Jason, for some reason, left his vehicle in a foggy state without his jacket or his phone. And then, he maybe walked south on Salt Flat Road, he dropped his backpack, and then a bit later removed all his clothing. And that means that he was walking down a gravel road barefoot and naked. And this behavior can be an example of paradoxical undressing resulting from feeling hot, even though you are you're freezing. Some people theorize that this happened with the hikers on Dyatlov Pass, for example, which is what we mentioned in the beginning of this episode. Possible causes of this are hypothermia, excited delirium from drugs, and or internal bleeding from an accident. So if he were hot, he would not have sought out shelter, even though it was freezing. During this state, he may have been enticed to enter water to cool down, or maybe even fallen into the creek or pond. And it's also possible he eventually developed hide and die syndrome, or burrowing, where people will dig trying to survive. It's usually the last phase of hypothermia. If all of this is actually what happened, he probably died not far from where his clothing was found. But however, several searches were conducted for any trace of him and nothing was found.
As of October 16th, 2021, Texas Search and Rescue deploy volunteers to examine areas of interest identified through artificial intelligence and other geospatial tools. With the data gathered and analyzed from the past searches, the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office identified points of interest that should be searched and investigated further. Some bones turn up, but confirmed that none are human remains.
One thing to mention, in recent news, an unnamed man who looks very similar to Jason Landry was found unconscious and unresponsive in New York. Photos of the man circulated on social media, which led to speculation that the man could very well have been Landry. Authorities said that the man was not carrying identification and was found near the Bronx area on July 22nd of 2022, and he did not have any visible injuries and was being treated at a nearby New York hospital. It was, however, confirmed by authorities that this man, who has not been publicly named, was identified as someone from Yonkers, a suburb of north of New York City. His family has been notified, Quote, "This whole thing has its ups and downs," Kent said, when he had hopes that the man in New York was Jason. Quote, "We don't know if it's him, but I can say this feels a bit different because the picture does look a lot like him," end quote. Can you even begin to imagine what he is going through, this poor man?
In December of 2021, a badly decomposed body was found in the Guadalupe River, which many speculated could have been Jason Landry, but that body was identified as 16-year-old Benjamin Tank Lorera from Vanderbilt, which is near Victoria, who had also been reported missing. In a Facebook post, Kent expressed sadness about not finding his son, but offered prayers for the family of the man who was found. As for Ferry, he theorizes that Landry was under the influence, took a wrong turn, and crashed the car. He then exited, stripped off his clothes, and wandered off in the near-freezing temperature, died, and was devoured by wild hogs. Quote, "I don't think the hogs are what killed him, but hogs are opportunistic," end quote. I understand logic, I really do, but we have to have some kind of optimism here.
Catherine Shellman, a volunteer from San Marcos who helped in the search for Jason Landry, spearheaded a fundraiser by creating handbags out of banners that were ordered by members of VFW Buddha Post number 12161. They ended up with 50 handbags out of these banners. Each handbag was unique in the sense that they were made from different pieces of the banner, one showing a missing persons flyer, another with a letter written by his mom. And on the handbag idea, when approached with the banners, she goes on to say, "So I thought, what about some handbags? Why don't we upcycle Jason's banners into something that people can be a part of?" End quote. And that's pretty rad.
Since Shellman is a San Marcos resident, she was instrumental in the search, not only because of the fundraiser, but also because she knew a ton about the area. She went on to say, quote, "A lot of this area does flood, so we're thinking, God forbid Jason's no longer with us. If his remains are somewhere, they could quite possibly have spread out over a great distance. So we don't want to leave one rock unturned," end quote. Kent Landry said Jason had a few scars from past surgeries that could help with his identification. Jason Landry has been missing since December 13th of 2020, coming up on 2 years.
Before we wrap up, be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We do love, and we love when you love us. It inspires us to keep telling these stories.
Also, don't forget to join our Patreon so that if you've had enough of the dark and heavy shit, you can hear our palate cleanser podcast called Not So Nefarious Criminals.
Man, I totally forgot we had that podcast. How did I forget about talking about that?
You also always forget we are recording, even though you are the one recording it.
You know, I was gonna sing. I'm not going to, but blame it on my ADD, baby.
She's not lying. She really does have ADD. She also forgets we have a guest each episode.
And that podcast is fun because did you know that every single day is a national day of some sort? That's what the podcast is all about,
Unfortunately, yes. Well, because of you.
Jason Landry, no matter what the circumstance, is vulnerable, whether survived or not. He is vulnerable and his family needs our help. He was or is approximately 6'1", 170 pounds with medium-length brown hair and olive complexion, with a scar possibly on his right ankle. It's believed that he has facial hair, possibly a goatee, and last seen in Caldwell County in Texas near Salt Flat Road. If you have any information, please call the AG Cold Case Unit at 512-936-0742. There is currently a $10,000 reward being offered. You can also call Caldwell County Sheriff's Office at 512-398-6777, extension 4516 if you have any information. Jason Landry, as well as his family, are bees. We must protect the bees at all costs. So be vigilant, for when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Original intro music by Ghost Stories Incorporated. Remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional music provided by Epidemic Sound. This podcast was researched, scripted, and produced by Amanda Cronin and Courtney Finner. A Nefarious Nightmare is a Cloud 10 iHeart podcast. Managed by A Nefarious Nightmare, Sim Sarna, and Jamie Rice of Murderish and Dirty Money Moves. Thank you again for listening, and be vigilant.